What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another video. In this one, we'll be taking a look at a brand new video that has just dropped from Meta Immersive Synthetics. And if you don't know about this company, they've released their first trailer about a year ago, about 11 months ago, where we were all speculating that it might be the next big competitor to DCS. Finally, the first competitor to DCS. But unfortunately, we found out that this apparently is only a platform designed for military flight simulation, i.e. for the actual military. And this is how Meta Immersive Synthetics describes their so-called NOR platform. The NOR platform brings the cutting-edge technology and accessibility of commercial gaming engines to the high-end military training and simulation market. Meta Immersive Synthetics combined the stunning visuals of the Unreal Engine with a proprietary physics-based model of the world, creating NOR, an ultimate fidelity simulation platform that can be used to simulate, train, or model anything across air, land, sea, space, and the electromagnetic spectrum. And just like many of us, I have a real love-hate relationship with DCS, Digital Combat Simulator. On the one hand, it provides us with the most realistic combat flight simulator out there, but mostly because it is the only combat flight simulator out there. And although that's great and has brought me a huge amount of joy, there is absolutely no doubt that DCS has a huge amount of shortcomings, and part of that is because there's no competition on the market. They can do whatever they like, whenever they like, and we, as the consumers, will just have to bear with it and wait for as long as we have to, because we don't have anywhere else to go. And for that reason, I think a brand new platform on the scene to compete with DCS would be absolutely fantastic. I would say the main shortcomings of DCS relate to artificial intelligence, whereby it's simply not good enough in most scenarios, both AI units on the ground and in the air, with the exception of BFM, which has been improved recently, but in general, I'm sure a lot of you will know what I'm talking about. And also in terms of lack of multi-threading, which means we can't create a large battlefield with a lot of units on the ground, unfortunately due to a lack of processing power. So I'm very excited to see if the NOR platform, which is based on Unreal Engine 5, could potentially solve that and be a big competitor to DCS.
We have 2 good engine starts. You're clear to disconnect the headset. We'll see you on the left with the pin. Thanks a lot.
Continue.
Alright, so let's analyze some of the details in this video. This scene right here is obviously real life, not the sim. And this is the sim. This is them showing us just how many polygons, I guess, they have in their 3D model. And it's quite frankly, you'll see it's a recurring theme. It's just ridiculously spectacular. The entire thing in terms of level of detail. Inside the cockpit, outside the cockpit, you see all these 3D elements on this ladder here. It's just the sort of macro detail that I think has never been implemented in any flight sim ever. Perhaps occasionally within the flight deck, etc., but definitely not to the point of, you know, all these ladders and things on the ground. The Typhoon pilot looking comfy in his incredible looking helmet straight out of Alien vs Predator. Probably the coolest looking pilot helmet in the history of aviation. Typhoon perhaps not the prettiest aircraft. This right here is where I am going to draw up my argument for the fact that this, I think, is going to be a consumer sim for the future, or maybe it was planned as a consumer sim in the first place and then switched to military or something like that. But I think maybe they're aiming for the consumer market because, as you can see here, the aircraft is highly detailed. And okay, fine, I can maybe more or less understand that the aircraft being highly detailed is important for the military and for their purposes and for the training of their flight crews, maybe because they're picking up visual cues, maybe information flying or whatever it is. The terrain and the super ultra high level of detail of terrain also makes sense because it means you can pick up visual cues at low level flying, you can get your targeting pods to show the sort of realistic picture, and so on and so forth. Makes sense. But my question is, if you look at these wheel chocks, they are just, they are beyond ridiculous. Like the amount of polygons and everything and the detail that they've used just for the wheel chocks there. It's completely unnecessary for the military to have any of that detail, because the military is interested in procedural sims, and this just doesn't add anything to them other than extra man hours for creating this. And similarly with this thing, which I think is an air conditioning unit. If some of you know what this is, comment down below. I think it's an air conditioning unit. Could be wrong. But again, there's about 1,000 polygons all in here, you know, with this hose. It makes no sense for the military to take any interest in having all that detail modeled. So my argument is, I think they're aiming for people like us who are the who, you know, appreciate the pretty picture. That's why we pay the money. Whereas the military, I don't know about it. I'm just, yeah, I'm not convinced. Here I would say this doesn't really look particularly much better than DCS. I think this afterburner effect is a little bit, it looks cool, but I think it's maybe not as realistic as it could be. Although actually this previous scene is kind of interesting with the landing gear. Now you could see just the amount of detail if you look at these wheels here. Just look at this wheel assembly and all these little holes. I mean, this is more realistic looking and well, quite frankly, more detailed than the DCS. And I just don't understand why. I mean, it's amazing. I just don't see why you would spend time modeling all that stuff. But yeah, it's almost like real life. Here, just look at the resolution of this AMRAM and the writing on it. It's just ridiculous. And all these little screws over here and the rivets are just phenomenal. For some reason, the rivets on the actual leading edge are not modeled quite as well, but I think they can be forgiven considering everything else is just beyond ridiculous. Interesting detail here. They're using the exact same charts, I guess from the exact same provider that we are using in DCS. I'm not really sure where they're from, but they're using Fallon Naval Air Station, which we don't have in DCS. But the Nevada Test and Training Range, which is what this is, but that's just me nitpicking. The way this AIM-9X hits that target now, I think is one of the most realistic explosions. Definitely better than what we have in DCS. I think that's pretty cool to see that kind of detail. Just the way that aircraft explodes and then goes on fire is really, really spectacular. You could see now the level of detail in these switches. They've gone to town in the cockpit. I mean, again, to the point of where it's almost just like, is it even necessary? I mean, it's amazing they've done it. This is a little bit of marketing, I think. This is just a satellite image, and they're just showing us how they're creating this terrain. Again, just a pretty picture here for a bit of marketing. But pretty cool. You can see the amount of polygons here in the terrain, and I think it's using similar technology to Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 in the sense that the higher up you are, the less polygons there are, and the lower down you are, the more detailed, the more polygons there are, and the terrain sort of starts to form these little crevices and creases and all these little you know, details that are you know, really add to that level of realism when you're flying low level, which we're missing in DCS, unfortunately. I think DCS, this is where one of the biggest shortcomings of DCS currently is definitely in the maps department. And although we've had some pretty decent maps, I guess, you know, considering that Edge engine, the Caucasus and the Syria map, but now I think we're going completely downhill with the South Atlantic map, which I think is just basically like going back to Flight Simulator 1998. And I was looking at the Kola Peninsula map images and the North Australia map, and I just have real doubts about those being even anywhere near on par with Syria or the Caucasus. So this is the technology we really need, and I guess this is the sort of similar technology that Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 has. We really need it in DCS, I think, for a realistic look. Now the trees here, I think, again, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 looks much better in terms of vegetation and trees and that three-dimensional feel of vegetation and forests. I think these guys haven't quite cracked it. And I think these trees look a bit weird at some angles and have this LOD level of detail where they turn into 2D objects at a certain distance, which is, I think it's been solved in Unreal Engine 5, but maybe it's just not implemented here yet. And again, you see all these little creases and stuff, and the terrain, you see these little shadows. It just adds to that level and immersion of flying at low level, which completely missing in DCS. this, as you can see, the terrain looks, I would say, kind of low res. At high altitude, almost looks like exactly like what DCS looks like at this level, but obviously when you get down, I think is where all those textures and all that mesh starts to shine. And here they've modeled the Chengdu J20. You can see they've put a lot of effort into the cockpit and into the pilot there. Just makes me wonder why they really needed to do that for a military flight sim. Again, it's a lot of man hours to waste. Just put all those details in there. Seems a little crazy. Again, this is showing the fantastic mesh of this terrain. This looks like it's totally realistic, and in DCS it'd be made out of about 7 polygons and it'd be straight lines. And of course, flying low level is amazing. Also means that if you ever want to make an emergency landing, etc., then you actually have to start taking that into account. And I see they've got this little container city for practice. That's pretty cool. Textures in the background there quite low, but I guess, and just like here, you can see texture is pretty low, but I think it's just for optimization. When you get low, they get more detailed, and I guess that's just fine, because at high level, you don't really care about that, but at low level, you do. So my guess is that's how it works. I could be wrong, but I think it's a sort of optimization thing that they've done. Wish we had that as well, quite frankly. Eurofighter Typhoon cockpit. Well, this is pretty much as realistic as it gets in terms of any cockpit ever in any simulator. I think we can all agree on that. It just looks absolutely spectacular. And this shot right here, again, is one of those shots which makes me wonder as to why they're wasting their time doing all this for the military. If you look at this Tunguska, you see the incredible level of detail in those hooks. You'll see there's a weld line over here on the turret that looks three-dimensional. I just don't see the point of wasting your time doing any of this. My only theory is that maybe they've just done it for marketing purposes and they went completely to town on this trailer and all the objects in this trailer to show the militaries that, hey, look, this is how good the product can look. But then actually when they have the contract, they might say, okay, but actually, if you really want to have this level of detail everywhere, it's going to cost you a whole bunch more, and it's going to, take a lot more time to develop. So the actual end product for the military might not look like this. It's just kind of a showcase as to how it can look in certain areas if they really wanted to. So that is a theory. They could just do this for marketing, but I kind of hope that that's not the case. I really hope they're doing this because they're aiming for the broader consumer market. And maybe they're implementing the first-person shooter here. Like, this is just ridiculous. This is like Escape from Tarkov doesn't look this good in terms of, these people's movements and how they're just... I mean, it's just so realistic. It's just crazy. Again, a bit of depth of field effect here just for some cinematics. But again, ridiculous level of detail. And again, I mean, if you're a JTAC, does it really matter if you're doing this for the military as a sim? Do you really care about spending all the money and time on creating all these details for your soldiers when it's more of a procedural sim? I guess for JTAC that's what it is. They don't really care about the level of detail as much. So here, very cool. You could see the way this explodes. They have a lot of little explosive elements here, and I think this is definitely better than the DCS. I think the explosion DCS sometimes do look good, so I am nitpicking, I guess, sometimes, but this is very cool. This is really, really, really cool. There's a lot of elements here, and when it explodes, you see all this debris flying. We have some of that in DCS too, to be fair, but I think this is a little bit nicer. Terrain, of course, and well, not to mention the people there, just look ridiculous. This is one of the most interesting scenes. I've actually analyzed this a little bit. Not even in the previous trailer, I think, have we actually had a scene where we could gauge the flight dynamics. And in this trailer before, though, there was a lot of aircraft flying. We couldn't actually tell how realistic the flight dynamics are, but I've rewatched this scene a couple of times with this F-16 banking and making that turn, and you can really tell the way it starts to, the way it makes the bank and the air interacting with the airflow, interacting with the airframe and the wings, and then putting on that G. You can really, really tell that this is definitely, most certainly, a proper flight simulator. and that I would hope they put just as much effort into the flight dynamics as they have into some of the details in the terrain. Something worth mentioning here is the clouds. They have their own very specific look in this sim, with a lot of these tiny little circular micro details. I don't really know how to describe it. Looks pretty cool. The only thing is they're not showing off any particular weather systems. It all kind of seems pretty similar-ish. And I think this is probably one area where so far I think DCS actually looks more realistic, is the clouds. I think the clouds on DCS are really spectacular for the type of clouds that we have, although they're somewhat limited. It's certainly limited in terms of proper weather systems and changing fronts, but it's impossible to tell whether this sim actually improves on that at all. Some cool lighting. I don't really like these lights, I think, but they are zoomed in. One thing I picked up on here is they're not showing us the touchdown, and I have a feeling it's because the ground handling potentially and the physics of the oleo struts compressing, etc., are perhaps not quite there yet. For some reason, they just don't show how the aircraft's touching down, and then after that, when it's rolling on the ground, the way they're compressing it doesn't feel right. So maybe it's an alpha or a beta thing. Maybe they'll improve it in the future. I don't know. And the final scene, which is really cool again. Here you can see the dynamic lighting of the aircraft. And of course, we've just had dynamic lighting added, or I should say maybe night external dynamic lighting added in some of the maps in DCS. And I mean, this is leaps and bounds beyond that, of course, I think. I mean, this as a showcase has been a spectacular piece of simulation, no doubt about it. Of course, we cannot really judge whether or not it's actually a fully developed sim, and how well is the AI integrated, etc. Or, do you know what I mean? Lots of details about this are unknown, so we don't really know. And of course, they have been marketing it specifically for the military. They keep talking about the future of military, but I think it is very possible that they've either started this as a commercial project, or that they're thinking that they will expand it as a commercial project. Because one thing to note is that I think Eagle Dynamics themselves admit that their military contracts, which they have a few, I believe, around the world, actually bring them less money than the commercial side, the gamer consumer side, which is kind of interesting. And you'd imagine that if these guys have this sort of technology implemented, these sort of graphics, of course they will compete with DCS, and of course they will take some market share because it looks better. It looks far better. Obviously, we don't know the flight dynamics, but provided they have, you know, the flight dynamics at least on par with DCS, at least for one aircraft, I think it is safe to assume that they can start to be a serious competitor. Which would be very healthy, I believe, because competition drives innovation, and at the end of the day, we're just going to get a better product. So anyway, if you guys disagree with my thoughts, and if you think that this is never going to become a commercial project or a consumer product, then please comment down below and just let me know your thoughts. It'd be very interesting to know, and if anybody has any more details on this project whatsoever, would be delighted. Comment down below. I'm sure a lot of other people would appreciate that as well, because I'm sure a lot of us are really keeping our fingers crossed and really hoping and you know, writing to Santa, asking for this to be the next sort of competitor to DCS. So anyway, if you've enjoyed this little overlook, please make sure to smash the living daylight out of the like button, subscribe for future videos, and hopefully I shall catch you in the next one. Adios.
3 versus normal. 74%. Auto disarm. 90 knots.
Alright, any last word? What are you doing? What? Oh dear. Let's try that one more time.